Hello, my name is Sissy Fowler. I'd like to thank Daniela Shebitz and the panelists in the Ethnobiology for Community session, as well as the organizers for this year's annual conference for giving me the time to present Linking Global Change with Global Health, Making and Unmaking Freshwater on Sumba Island in Indonesia's arid southeast. I'd also like to thank my teachers, collaborators, and hosts on Sumba in Indonesia, as well as American Indian communities whose homelands are in the Carolinas region where I live now and where my ancestors have lived since the early colonial era. As well, I'd like to thank my colleagues, students, staff, and faculty for their kind support at Wofford College. Water security was selected as a topic for today's presentation through collaboration with Mr. Ranga Ede, an elder resident of Southwest Sumba. In June 2007, Ranga Ede and I together identified water security as the highest priority for research, as Ranga Ede dipped drinking water for himself out of the trunk of a felled banana plant. "This is how poor we are," he said. "We have to find our drinking water in the trunks of banana plants." Ranga Ede asked me to take his photo, and as he posed for the photos you see in this slide, he said, "Water is the biggest limitation on the well-being of Sumbanese. We need for you to study the problem of water here." Outside sources verify Mr. Ranga Ede's point about water insecurity in his homelands. West Sumba has the highest rate of water insecurity in Nusa Tenggara Timur province, known as NTT, with more than 40% of households lacking sufficient clean drinking water. In NTT, 56% of households have to travel more than 1 kilometer to access clean water, and 33% of households lack access to clean drinking water altogether. NTT ranks 32nd out of 33 provinces in Indonesia, which is the next to worst on the Human Development Index. 23% of NTT's residents are impoverished. Southwest Sumba District is the second poorest district in NTT. This high degree of poverty is linked to access to clean water, which in turn is a proximal determinant of human health and overall well-being, as evident in a study from a village in Southwest Sumba where 95% of residents ages 2 months to 80 years suffer from intestinal parasitic infections due to unclean water and lack of sanitary facilities. The availability of fresh water on Sumba, while extremely variable across space and through time due to the island's hydrology and geology, as well as weather and climate, limits the well-being of Sumbanese people. Water is a critically limited resource in this monsoonal environment, and its availability varies across specific sites. Since water is always entangled in political ecologies that may be transitory, its availability is increasingly precarious. Amidst the many entangled political ecological processes that affect fresh water on Sumba is water grabbing. The already precarious situation with freshwater availability is being aggravated by water grabbing. Specific freshwater reservoirs and creeks are medleys of ideas and practices related to legitimacy in the governance, management, tenure, and use of water. The types of naturally occurring sites where Southwest Sumba's residents collect fresh water include streams, creeks, springs, ponds, and micro-reservoirs such as banana plant trunks and tree cavities. Fresh water is also captured using rainwater collection systems, dams, streams, cement pools, and wells. Water can be purchased from tanker trucks, but most residents of Southwest Sumba rely on the naturally occurring sources of water. And since they tend to not live adjacent to these sources, accessing the water requires walking distances from their homes that vary from less than 1 kilometer to up to 10 kilometers each way. Of particular interest in this presentation are those freshwater sites where distinct types or regimes of legitimacy intersect. Encounters between customary governments, the Indonesian state, and multinational organizations create ecological and social ripple effects. As relationships between governmental and non-governmental entities change, the landscape literally changes as well. Governance at all levels changed radically in Indonesia since the end of the 20th century, as the nation moved out of the 31-year-long Suharto rulership to the post-Suharto Reformasi era, beginning in 1999. Numerous governance regimes impact freshwater tenure and use on Sumba and comparable post-colonial settings where pluralism globally as well as nationally is common. One transformation in the governance of freshwater resources that has accompanied the move from a guided democracy to a presidential republic has been an increase in water grabbing through the transfer of ownership and use rights or de facto use rights from adat, customary communities, to more powerful persons or entities who are not the multi-generational owners. Water grabbing on Sumba has been increasing during the 22-year-long post-authoritarian reformation of the nation state. Three questions regarding legitimacy emerge here in the discussion about the conditions enabling water grabbing. First, in what ways has legitimacy been defined and how has it changed in the 22-year-long transition from a guided democracy to a decentralized democracy? Franco and his co-authors link water grabbing to legitimacy when they explain that it involves the capturing of control not just of the water itself, but also of the power to decide how it will be used. A second question, under what conditions of legitimacy is water grabbing occurring? The conditions under which people interact with fresh water on Sumba are impacted by the machinations of indigenous agropastoralists, resource managers working for Indonesian government agencies, non-Sumbanese investors seeking to capitalize from Sumba's resources, and the staff of non-governmental organizations and of corporations whose operations involve Sumba. The members of these groups are often moving along separate paths, but they also frequently converged in watered sites and over watery issues. A third question, how is freshwater and legitimate and illegitimate authority over freshwater made and remade in Sumba's semi-arid landscape? Freshwater is remade and made through everyday practices and multi-scale processes. Similarly, legitimate and illegitimate authority relative to freshwater are biosocially constructed by multi-scale, complex, and sometimes problematic processes. Being socially constructed indicates that legitimacy in the governance, management, and use of freshwater is both collective and subjective. And that creates variability in views about authority and power. Among the cross-cultural patterns in water grabbing is the association between water and land grabbing. On Sumba, water and land have been simultaneously grabbed for a reforestation scheme managed by federal and regional government agencies, sugar plantations designed by multinational corporations, a renewable energy project undertaken through a partnership between the Indonesian government and a multinational corporation, and several tourist resorts. Projects such as these restrict local people's access to fresh water and coastal resources, and thus risk water and food security, particularly in environments where fresh water is already limited. In addition, these processes have resulted in overharvesting and pollution. Orchestrating the assets necessary to grab water in order to produce trees, sugar, electricity, and tourism could only result under certain conditions. Water grabbing incidents on Sumba connect to aspects, forms, and machinations of legitimacy that allow, enable, facilitate, or promote the transfer of ownership of critical amounts of water. As you'll be able to faintly see by looking around this map of Southwest Sumba District, the Indonesian government claims ownership of sizable portions of land where they simultaneously exert dominion over freshwater resources. Through a series of decrees in 2014 and 2015, the federal and regional governments established the 20,000 plus hectare Southwest Sumba Protection Forest Management Unit, known as the KPHL. While the 2015 management plan for KPHL lists numerous management goals, it clearly highlights the precarity of water resources when it states protected forests in this area are generally more intended as a buffer for water systems. Secondarily, the KPHL managers value the native flora and fauna in the designated area. Additional management is the appropriation by outsiders of indigenous peoples' water and land. It often includes human rights violations when, by depriving people of water or the means of producing and processing food, they limit their access to it and their access to clean water. The magnitude of these problems is tremendous in Indonesia, as it is the country with the highest amount of grabbed rainwater. On Sumba, as elsewhere in Indonesia, the environment has been a battlefield for the legitimacy of indigenous, colonial, and post-colonial Indonesian nation state, as well as adat and developmentalist political ecologies. This peculiar series of political ecologies has tangible and intangible effects on the political sovereignty of customary communities, as well as ownership of their pre-colonial territories and use rights to resources therein. Customary communities have indeed participated in their political ecological history as they respond and adjust to, accommodate and resist, invite and exclude external agents and forces. The effects of tensions between adat societies and external agencies are made visible when we inquire into human ecological processes, such as agrarian livelihoods and fire ecologies, as well as when we take a look into ecosystems such as forests and oceans. The interplay between coexisting political ecological regimes has implications for freshwater. As a solution to the overlapping problems of water and land grabbing, overharvesting and pollution, Vel and Makabombu recommend defending indigenous peoples against the appropriation of their resources and advocating for the repatriation of their customary territories. While these activist scholars discourage concerned parties from focusing on customary tenurial practices related to land because, they argue, it may distract well-meaning efforts, I argue that knowing the details about legitimacy and illegitimacy related to tenure in adat communities is necessary because of the close association between land grabbing and the decline in water quantity and quality. Moreover, Sumbanese and Indonesians from other Indonesian islands are citing constitutional law and subsequent legislation related to tenure as they defend their rights to water and land. In response to the problems with pollution and scarcity that Vel and Makabombu recognize in cases of land grabbing, I maintain a wide lens when thinking about water grabbing in an attempt to see the varied and multiple issues related to it. Moreover, rather than being distracted by mapping clan lands, and even though I study details about the biogeography of freshwater and its tenure, I also aim to describe, or to do so in a more extended version elsewhere, transformations in people's interactions with water and in the water itself in the context of major political economic changes and considerable climate variabilities. As Vel and Makabombu point out, scholarly activism ought to focus on defending and promoting indigenous people's sovereignty. In fact, the critical work of adat activists on Sumba, who are representatives of customary communities, directly involves customary communities' water-related rights. Thank you so much for your time and attention today.